Okay, next, item 3.7, Innovation and Technology Report, Todd Shanley. And crew.
Good evening. I brought Jack Dodd, our security administrator, with us tonight. He's going to do a presentation about Cybersecurity Month. October is National Cybersecurity Month, and we will, he'll do a good job of showing you about that. But first, I want to talk a little about, first, this kind of covers in the, much like you talked about in your strategic plan that Robbie covered earlier. This is the technology's part of providing the safe community, with the idea that we're going to help people understand how to be safer when they're online. And then the other piece that Debbie outlines often is this covers her goal of creating a culture of innovation by educating and empowering staff. So next slide. And then also plugging this month's Employee Digital Book Club report. This book is The Cyber Conundrum: How Do We Fix Cybersecurity? Obviously, this is a very tech-centric book, but it comes from a voice that is not heavy tech and is written to address the problems that all of us are seeing with cybersecurity. So I encourage everyone to read it, and it's a quick read. The quick tip is the reader is a little bit slower on his delivery. There is a way to swipe on Hoopla and speed it up to 1.25, and it makes it sound like more of a natural speaker. So that was a little quick tip Debbie put out there on the book club this month. But let me tell you a little bit about Jack. Jack is a great find for Cabarrus County. He comes from Davie County, where he worked in the school system. Plus, he is a NC State grad. He has a bachelor's in electrical engineering, a bachelor's in computer engineering, and a master's in computer engineering from NC State, I mentioned. So we are very blessed and lucky to have him on staff. He's been with us for about 8 months now, and he's already making a huge difference for us. So having said that, I'm going to let him kick off with his presentation.
Okay, I hope I live up to expectations after that introduction. So it is October, it is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and what we're going to do over the next few minutes, I'm try to be quick, is the Department of Homeland Security has summed up cybersecurity into a simple phrase of own it, secure it, protect it. That is their mantra going into this thing this year. And I'll start with that own it component, which is when we talk about owning your cybersecurity, that is a very abstract concept. And so this primarily is knowing your data. Everything I deal with in my job for cybersecurity ultimately comes down to dealing with data, who has access to it, how it flows around, etc. So the first step for anybody in their cybersecurity is to know your data, know what's out there. Just a couple examples I pull out are cell phone location tracking. Big deal nowadays because I know I use it, put my location on my phone, share that out with my mother whenever I'm going across the state on a trip so that they can see me and watch me on my trip, make sure I get there okay. It's a legitimate use of that data. I control it. I own it. Along the same lines, social media is ever present and ever expanding. Know what data you're putting on social media. And this is especially true for the younger generation coming up through high school now. Understand the information that you are putting out there to the world. And once you get a handle on that data and what you're putting out in cyberspace, you've got to understand who has your data. To play off my previous two examples, your cell phone location probably belongs to Apple, Google, and maybe a couple other app vendors if you use them. Similarly, your social networks, Facebook, Twitter, Snap Incorporated, etc., they have great leverage over the data you give them. And they take it, they hold on to it, and they use it. And the last piece is to know how your data is shared. So know how those companies are using your data and know how that data is being shared out. So as I mentioned, Find My Friends, I love it because I forget to call when I get somewhere. And you can just look at my location and see that, oh yes, I did make it to Raleigh okay. And then on the social network side, the sharing will be governed by a privacy policy and various user settings. It is incredibly a very deep rabbit hole if you start going down all the different sharing settings that are available in just Facebook, and then multiply that by the 6 or 7 or so social networks the average teenager has. This is not an easy job. It's very complicated. And the Department of Homeland Security has put together some great resources to help with this. And so the next step, once you know where all this data is and know who has it, know what's going on with it. I forgot a topic, sorry. So we call this the digital footprint. I need to make sure I cover that. All this data, when it's out there in the web, termed it to be your digital footprint because that's kind of your mark you leave out in cyberspace. As I was getting to, once you know what your digital footprint is, where it's out there in cyberspace, the next step is securing that digital footprint. And so when we talk about securing data, we want to make sure that only the people who need to have access to that information have access. And it would not be a security presentation if I did not talk at least a little bit about strong passwords. Ever since the 80s, how we generate passwords has been a point of contention. Some people like to take a phrase or word and do some capitalization, substitute some random letters, and that's their password. There's other strategies that are out there, but I'm going to give you 2 examples up top. The first one is, as I was mentioning, the phrase "go Canes." Okay, throw in a 0 for an O, add a 4 or 3, change the S to a $, and put an exclamation mark on the end. Looks like a pretty decent password, looks pretty hard to guess to a human. And then the one under it is a bit of a conundrum because this is a really long password. All I did was put exclamation marks between all the words and mess with the capitalization just a touch. Between those 2 passwords, the one on the bottom is almost impossible to guess just because it is so long. It's very easy for a human to remember, very hard to guess. The password up top is about 9 characters long. With modern graphics cards, I can brute force that password in about 2 days. Starting from nothing, just test all the combinations, we can guess that password in about 2 days. So the ultimate moral of the story on passwords is that longer is better. Make them long, make them easy to remember. They can be sentences. And that in the last bullet up there for password management, we heavily discourage password reuse. So that's using the same password for multiple services. And I know even I'm guilty of it to some extent. But password managers are your friends. I know my mother likes to keep stuff written down in a notepad, and that is her password manager. It works for her, so I'm not going to try to change it. But there are many an online service that's available to take your passwords, store them in a secure spot, and when you get to the website that needs that password, it'll autofill it in for you, so you don't even have to worry about it. You don't have to remember it. It's all in that password manager. And so now that people are adopting these really long, really strong passwords, the bad guys turn to another tactic, and it's called phishing. And the core idea behind phishing is, can I have your password, please? It's really hard for me to guess it. Will you just give it to me? It sounds very simple when you phrase it that way, but that's what they do. They will send very specific, very crafted emails that look legitimate, and we'll put a link in that email that says, oh, your password's expiring, please click here to approve. And if you click there, it takes you to their website that might look like Amazon or Google or Apple. You sign in there and nothing happens, so it seems, but in reality, your credentials were just packaged up and delivered to a hacker with a bow on top. If anyone is in Cabarrus County, or anyone works for Cabarrus County government, I guarantee you have seen some of my fake phishing emails. I send those out at least once a month. I can brag on us for a minute. Our phish-prone percent is rather low compared to our sector. But for the general public, beware of links in emails. They are not always immediately obvious where they go. If you hover over them, they'll tell you where they go. And just be aware of them and don't trust them. We'll hear trust again in a minute. And the last point is using a second channel. So if you get an email that says, I'm from Netflix, you have an urgent account problem, click here. The easiest thing to do is just to go to netflix.com yourself, sign in there, and see if that message is replicated. Using that second channel of verification, you'll know pretty immediately whether that first email was true or was an attack. And the last component on security is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor is by far the best form of security commonly available on the web for authentication. We're starting to see multi-factor be required by more and more standards. I know my bank recently required multi-factor. It just came into force. And multi-factor always tries to tie your identity to both something you know and generally something you have. So if you think about the process you use when you use an ATM with a bank, that's multi-factor authentication that people have been doing for years and never realized it. Because you have to have your bank card to make the ATM do anything, and then you have to know your PIN to be able to access your account. So you had to have something, you had to know something, you multi-factored into your bank account. And what we started doing recently is saying, well, if you have to do that to use an ATM, you ought to have to multi-factor to use online services that do the exact same thing. And so multi-factor is becoming more popular. You'll see it more and more places. The exact mechanisms of how it works vary widely depending on who's implementing it. But overall, multi-factor is kind of our gold standard right now for what we can do in terms of securing an account. And the last piece of this puzzle is the protect it component. And while secure it focused pretty heavily on those technical aspects, protect it focuses more on the human aspects of cybersecurity. So the first part is very simple, is don't trust the internet. It's very easy to. It's very easy to see an email or a news article come across and place 100% of your trust right into that news article. But you can't do that, not on today's internet. Verification is the most important thing for any information you might get from the internet. When I took a cybersecurity class when I started with the county, my instructor loved to hammer to us every day, trust but verify. You can trust that, you get that information, you might trust it, but you've got to verify it before you place your full trust on anything you get from the internet. This is especially true with email. As I mentioned earlier in phishing, emails can be very, very dangerous. They're also very helpful. They are the primary form of communication for almost every business in operation in the United States. But it can be dangerous, especially attachments. Email attachments, again, easy to trust because it looks like a person legitimately sent this. But those attachments can have malicious code, malicious payloads where all it takes is opening one up and their code just ran. So verification is the main protection against that. Verify that the right people are sending you the right documents. Verify that the information you're being presented is what you think it is. The next component is guarding your digital footprint. So it's out there, you've secured it with strong passwords and maybe multi-factor. Now you've got to do some active things to guard it. And the most main points here is you need to take precautions with your important information. The federal government has an information classification system, so obviously stuff classified secret and above is treated a whole lot more carefully than stuff unclassified. On a personal level, it doesn't need to be near that robust, but obviously your important information, bank accounts, social security numbers, any type of information like that, you need to be careful with and you need to recognize that it is important. And then finally, keep an eye on your devices and your network. So make sure you're staying up to date with software updates. I get a feed from a security company that has a list of all the software vulnerabilities discovered this week. And it is amazing how quickly that list moves along. And that is why you get patches on Windows every month, and some software faster than that. Those updates are important, and you need to make sure that they're actually getting installed. It's one of the largest ways you'll see devices compromised is purely because they were missing an update. And the last component is to monitor online interaction. This is especially important for two reasons. The primary one is if you're dealing with kids in any sort of form, you need to monitor what they're doing online and who they're interacting with. And second, we have an election coming up, and this was a major focus of the 2016 election. The FBI has been eyeing this intensely over the last few years, and bad actors can and do use social media to exert influence on the general public, on our public opinion. And the Department of Homeland Security pulls this out into a brilliant piece they wrote called The War on Pineapple, which takes the ever-running debate among people whether pineapple belongs on a pizza or not. Seemingly trivial, but people tend to have a fairly strong opinion on that. And they go through and show you in ways that if someone's sitting with malicious intent and a little bit of knowledge of social engineering, they can start pushing people's buttons online. And you'll take the seemingly trivial topic of pineapple on pizza and end up with two groups who are ready to go to war with each other over pineapple on pizza. It's an excellent piece, and I would recommend looking into it. Speaking of which, this is just the tip of the iceberg. I covered only a handful of these points. The Department of Homeland Security's website there at the bottom goes into much more depth than I ever could in this meeting. There's a lot of information here, and enjoy Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Own it, secure it, protect it.
Jack will be doing this presentation for some of our internal groups. He also does all of the employee orientations. So he encourages all of our new staff to be safe online, and you have a couple other departments signed up already to do this presentation. Additionally, we were able to secure some pamphlets that you have there in front of you, chatting about kids being safe online, some basic laptop security bookmark, and another one for adults. These came from the Federal Trade Commission that you often see that the federal government's creating these publications, and we took advantage of those and getting those free. And we'll be working with Emery and her staff of putting those out in the libraries and other government facilities, so people can take full advantage of that. Thank you so much for letting us do this presentation tonight.
Thank you for offering that. I think that's beneficial for us as well as those folks watching on television at home.